The Silent Storm. It was a brisk Tuesday evening at the Metropolitan Fitness Center in Seattle, a hub of activity where weights clanged, treadmills hummed, and focused gym-goers pursued their fitness goals. The facility buzzed with the collective energy of determination and routine. Among the regulars was Raven Carter, a 32-year-old black woman whose presence commanded quiet respect. She didn't flaunt her strength or skill, but anyone who watched her could see she was no ordinary gym-goer. Raven's routine was methodical, circuit training that combined deadlifts, pull-ups, and combat-style cardio. She moved like clockwork, her focus unwavering. Tonight, she was clad in simple gray leggings and a navy tank top, her dark hair pulled back into a neat braid. Earbuds were firmly in place, a universal signal of do not disturb. She finished her set of box jumps and moved toward the squat rack. The gym was crowded, but Raven navigated the space with practiced ease. She adjusted the barbell weights, her movements fluid and precise. As she prepared to begin her set, a voice cut through her focus, pulling her out of her rhythm. "Hey, you're doing that wrong." The voice belonged to a man who looked to be in his late 40s. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and visibly proud of his physique, his posture exuding overconfidence. His name tag clipped to his gym towel. Read Dan. Raven glanced at him briefly, her expression neutral, and removed one earbud. "I'm sorry. What?" she asked, her tone polite but distant. "You're setting up the bar all wrong. You'll hurt yourself lifting like that," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. He gestured toward her barbell, as if he were some kind of authority figure. Raven straightened her posture, tilting her head slightly. "Thanks for the concern," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "I've got it." Dan wasn't satisfied with her response. Instead of leaving, he crossed his arms and planted himself near the rack, as though he had some unspoken right to the space. "Look, I've been lifting for years," he continued, his smirk unwavering. "Let me show you proper form." Without another word, Raven put her earbud back in and resumed her preparation. She didn't need his input, nor did she want it. But as she positioned herself under the barbell, she could feel his eyes on her, scrutinizing her every move. She ignored him. Dan's muttering grew louder, his disapproval spilling into audible comments. "Women these days think they're invincible," he said to no one in particular, loud enough for Raven to hear. A few gym-goers glanced over, sensing the rising tension, but no one intervened. The unspoken rule of gym culture, mind your own business, held firm. Raven completed her set, her form impeccable, and racked the barbell with a satisfying clang. She grabbed her water bottle and towel, intending to move to the cable machines. But as she turned, Dan was there again, blocking her path. "You're welcome, by the way," he said smugly. "For what?" Raven asked, her voice level but her eyes narrowing slightly. "For saving you from yourself," he replied, his smirk widening. "You could have really hurt your back lifting like that." Raven inhaled deeply, reining in the irritation bubbling beneath her calm exterior. Years of training, both physical and mental, had taught her the value of self-control. "I didn't ask for your help," she said simply, stepping around him. The air in the gym grew heavier as Dan followed her to the cable machines, his comments growing more pointed. "You know, you get better results if you listen to someone who knows what they're doing," he said. "You're strong, sure, but strength isn't everything. You need technique." Raven didn't respond, focusing instead on adjusting the weights. She could feel the eyes of other gym-goers on her, their curiosity piqued by the brewing confrontation. Dan's persistence wasn't just annoying, it was becoming a spectacle. As she began her tricep pull-downs, Dan leaned against a nearby pillar, watching her with a mixture of irritation and disbelief. "Women like you think they can do it all," he said, his voice loud enough to carry. "But you're just pretending. You don't really know what you're doing." This time, Raven paused mid-rep, setting the bar down gently. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable but her eyes sharp. "What's your problem?" she asked, her tone calm but edged with steel. Dan shrugged, his smirk returning. "No problem. Just trying to help, but you're too stubborn to admit you need it." Raven held his gaze for a long moment, then shook her head and returned to her workout. She knew his type, men who thrived on dominance, who couldn't handle being ignored or outdone, especially by a woman. Engaging with him further would only feed his ego. But Dan wasn't finished. He followed her to the water fountain, his voice growing louder and more aggressive. "You think you're better than me, don't you? What makes you so special?" He spat, his words dripping with hostility. Raven turned to face him, her expression calm but unyielding. "Nothing makes me special," she said evenly. "But I don't need to prove anything to you." Her words, delivered with quiet authority, seemed to enrage him further. He stepped closer, his posture threatening. "You better watch your mouth," he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. The tension in the gym reached a boiling point. A few people stopped their workouts entirely, their gazes flicking nervously between Raven and Dan. Some whispered among themselves, debating whether to step in. Others pretended not to notice, their discomfort evident. Raven didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her body relaxed but ready. She'd faced far greater threats than Dan in her lifetime, and she wasn't about to let him intimidate her. "You need to calm down," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "Walk away." Dan's face darkened, his jaw tightening. "Or what?" he sneered, stepping even closer. Raven's response was immediate. Her hand shot up, grabbing his wrist in a vice-like grip. The move was so fast, so controlled, that Dan froze in shock. His bravado faltered as she twisted his arm just enough to force him to step back, her strength and precision undeniable. The room fell silent, the weight of the moment settling over everyone present. Raven released his wrist and took a step back, her posture calm but commanding. "This ends now," she said, her voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. "Leave me alone." Dan stared at her, his face a mix of anger and humiliation. But he didn't make another move. The realization of what he was dealing with, someone far more capable than he had assumed, was written all over his face. Without another word, Raven turned and walked away, leaving Dan to grapple with his bruised ego and the judgmental stares of the other gym-goers. The moment lingered in the air, a silent testament to the power of quiet strength and unwavering confidence. Unveiling strength. The gym buzzed with murmurs after the confrontation, but Raven paid no attention. Her focus was razor-sharp, her breathing steady as she walked toward the free weights section. The adrenaline coursing through her veins didn't make her tremble, it sharpened her senses. Years of training had taught her how to channel that energy, not let it control her. She selected a pair of heavy dumbbells, adjusting her grip and rolling her shoulders before starting a series of farmer's carries. As she moved purposefully across the gym floor, a few eyes lingered on her, some admiring her poise, others whispering in curiosity. Most were still stunned by her effortless handling of Dan moments ago. Behind the front desk, 2 employees whispered urgently. Tara, the younger of the 2, looked worried. "We should have stepped in sooner," she said, glancing toward Raven. "We're not bouncers," the older employee, Mike, replied. "Besides, she handled it better than either of us could have." "She shouldn't have had to," Tara muttered, guilt creeping into her voice. Mike sighed. "Maybe, but she wasn't just any gym-goer. Did you see how fast she moved? She knew exactly what she was doing." Meanwhile, Dan had retreated to the locker room, his ego bruised but his anger simmering. He slammed his locker shut, muttering curses under his breath. He couldn't shake the humiliation of being outmatched by someone he had underestimated so completely. His pride wouldn't let it go. As Raven finished her set and set the weights down with a controlled motion, she felt a presence approach. She turned to see a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a cautious demeanor. The woman hesitated, clutching a towel in her hands. "Hi," the woman said softly. "I just wanted to say thank you." for standing up to him. That was inspiring. Raven gave a small smile, her expression warm but reserved. "Thank you," she replied. But it wasn't about making a statement. It was about setting boundaries. The woman nodded. "I get that. But still, seeing you handle it like that, it made me think about how often I've let people like him get away with things." She hesitated before adding, "I wish I had your confidence." Raven tilted her head slightly. "Confidence doesn't come from wishing. It comes from knowing you can handle yourself. The rest follows." The woman seemed to absorb the words, nodding thoughtfully before stepping away. Raven returned to her workout, but the brief exchange lingered in her mind. She wasn't a stranger to inspiring others. Her career had made her a symbol of resilience, but she hadn't come to the gym to play a hero. She was here for herself, her discipline, and her own quiet goals. As she moved to the pull-up bar, Dan reappeared. His face was a storm of conflicting emotions: anger, shame, and determination. But this time, he didn't approach immediately. Instead, he hovered near the machines, watching her with a mixture of resentment and curiosity. Raven noticed him, but didn't react. She executed a flawless set of pull-ups, her movements fluid and controlled. Each rep was a testament to her strength and focus. She wasn't performing for anyone, least of all Dan, but she knew the power of presence. Her confidence wasn't loud, it was unshakable, and it spoke volumes. Dan finally moved closer, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You think you're better than everyone, don't you?" he said, his voice low but laced with bitterness. Raven finished her set, dropping gracefully to the floor. She turned to face him, her expression calm but unyielding. "No," she said simply. "I just know my limits. And yours." Her words hit like a slap, and Dan's face reddened. "You don't know anything about me," he snapped. "You don't know what I've been through." For a moment, Raven considered his words. She recognized the insecurity beneath his anger, the desperation to assert himself in a world that likely hadn't been kind to him. But understanding didn't mean excusing. "You're right," she said, her tone measured. "I don't know your story, but I do know that trying to tear someone down won't fix what's broken in you." Dan's mouth opened as if to retort, but no words came. Her calm delivery and piercing gaze left him speechless. He looked away, the weight of her words sinking in. The tension between them was interrupted by the sound of clapping. Raven and Dan both turned to see a small group of gym-goers standing nearby, their expressions a mix of admiration and discomfort. One of them, a young man with earbuds dangling around his neck, stepped forward. "That was amazing," he said, addressing Raven. "You didn't just handle him. You taught all of us something." Raven's brow furrowed slightly. "This isn't a show," she said, her tone firm. "It's a reminder that we all deserve respect." The group murmured in agreement, and Raven took the opportunity to step away, heading toward the locker room. She needed a moment to herself, away from the eyes and the whispers. Inside the quiet space, she leaned against a bench, her reflection staring back at her from the mirror. She studied her own face, searching for any sign of the storm brewing inside. But there was none. She was steady, as always. Her phone buzzed in her bag, breaking her thoughts. She retrieved it and saw a message from an old friend, Jackson, a fellow Navy SEAL she hadn't seen in years. The message was short. "Training saves lives, but sometimes it also saves dignity. Proud of you, Raven." She smiled faintly. Word traveled fast in her circles. No doubt someone had recorded the earlier incident and shared it online. Raven wasn't surprised. She had always known that moments like these had the potential to ripple far beyond their origin. As she packed her belongings, the locker room door opened, and Tara stepped inside. The young employee hesitated before speaking. "I just wanted to check on you," she said. "Are you okay?" Raven looked at her, appreciating the concern. "I'm fine," she said. "Thank you." Tara fidgeted with her hands, then blurted, "How did you stay so calm?" "When he got in your face, I mean." "I would have panicked." Raven considered the question before answering. Calm doesn't mean you're not affected. It means you know how to channel what you're feeling. I've been trained for situations like that, to assess threats and respond appropriately. But it's not just training. It's knowing who you are. Tara nodded, her admiration evident. I wish I had that kind of strength. You do, Raven said simply. Strength isn't about being fearless. It's about standing firm when it counts. As Tara absorbed her words, Raven slung her gym bag over her shoulder and headed for the door. The weight of the day lingered, but it didn't burden her. Instead, it reminded her of something she had learned long ago. Strength wasn't about overpowering others. It was about knowing when to stand tall and when to walk away. Echoes of resolve. Raven exited the locker room with her gym bag slung casually over her shoulder. The air outside was brisk, a cool breeze swirling through the city streets. It was late now. The once crowded fitness center was beginning to empty as gym-goers filed out, their workouts done for the day. Raven's footsteps were measured as she walked toward her car, her mind replaying the events of the evening. She wasn't angry, nor was she rattled. Situations like the one with Dan were nothing new to her. Men like him weren't uncommon, a volatile mix of insecurity and entitlement. What lingered, though, was the energy in the room during the confrontation. The way people had hesitated, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. It was a familiar dynamic, and one that Raven had seen in far more dangerous settings. As she reached her car, her phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from her younger sister, Layla. Saw the video. You're famous now, huh? Call me when you can. Raven let out a soft sigh, shaking her head as she unlocked her car. She had suspected someone would upload the confrontation online, but she hadn't expected it to spread so quickly. She slid into the driver's seat, her mind already crafting the words she'd use to reassure Layla. The next morning, Raven awoke to a flood of notifications. Her social media accounts, normally quiet, were buzzing with tags, mentions, and messages. The video of her and Dan had gone viral, shared across multiple platforms. Some of the captions praised her composure and strength, while others sensationalized the event, calling her a mystery warrior or the woman who shut down a bully. Raven scrolled through the comments briefly. The support was overwhelming, with people applauding her for standing up to Dan, but the negativity was there too, a reminder of how polarized the internet could be. She closed the app with a sigh and turned her attention to her coffee. The routine of brewing the strong cup of black coffee grounded her, providing a moment of stillness before the day's inevitable chaos. Her phone rang, breaking the silence. It was Layla. Morning, Raven said, her tone light as she answered. Don't morning me, Layla replied, her voice tinged with worry. What was that about? Who was that guy? And why do you look like a superhero in that video? Raven chuckled softly, taking a sip of her coffee. It was just a misunderstanding. He was trying to prove a point, and I wasn't interested. A misunderstanding. He got in your face. And then you. Layla's voice dropped to a dramatic whisper. You flipped him like he was nothing. Raven, that's not normal. Layla, Raven said gently. I've been handling situations like that my entire life. You know that. Her sister sighed on the other end of the line. Yeah, I know. But people online are calling you a Navy SEAL. Did they guess? Or? Raven's silence answered the question. Layla groaned. Raven, you know how I feel about you being low-key. Now everyone knows you're a badass. I didn't confirm anything, Raven said evenly. People can speculate all they want. It doesn't change who I am or what I do. Layla was quiet for a moment before saying, just be careful, okay? People get weird about this kind of thing. I'm always careful, Raven assured her. Besides, I doubt Dan will come back for round 2. At the gym later that evening, the atmosphere was noticeably different. Raven walked in as usual, her earbuds in and her gym bag slung over her shoulder, but the energy in the room had shifted. People glanced her way more often than usual, some offering smiles or subtle nods. A few whispered to each other as she passed, their curiosity palpable. She ignored the attention, heading straight to the squat rack. As she adjusted the weights, Tara approached hesitantly, clutching a clipboard. "Hi, Raven," Tara said, her voice tentative. Do you have a minute?" Raven looked up, offering a small smile. "Sure. What's up?" I wanted to say thank you again. For yesterday," Tara said, her cheeks flushing slightly. "And a lot of people here are talking about what happened. I thought you should know." Raven tilted her head. "Talking about what, exactly?" "About how you handled that guy," Tara said. "Some people think it was amazing, but others are intimidated. I guess. They're saying you're too intense." Raven raised an eyebrow. "Intense?" Tara nodded. "Yeah. Like, they don't know how to approach you now. They think you're, like, some kind of superhero." Raven let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "I'm not a superhero, Tara. I'm just someone who knows how to handle herself." "I know that," Tara said quickly. "But not everyone does. And I thought you should know that management is concerned." That caught Raven's attention. "Concerned about what?" "About the video," Tara said, lowering her voice. "It's bringing a lot of attention to the gym. They're worried it might make people uncomfortable." Raven frowned slightly, but kept her tone calm. "If management has a problem, they can talk to me directly." Tara nodded, looking relieved. "I'll let them know. Thanks for understanding." As Raven continued her workout, she couldn't shake the conversation with Tara. It wasn't the first time her strength or presence had made others uncomfortable, but the idea that it might affect her place at the gym bothered her. She'd come here for years, maintaining a quiet, disciplined routine. She had no interest in becoming the center of attention. She moved to the heavy bag, wrapping her hands before starting a series of powerful strikes. Each punch landed with precision, the rhythm of her movements a testament to years of combat training. It was meditative, each strike clearing her mind and grounding her. But as she worked the bag, she noticed someone standing nearby. She paused, her body still as she turned to see who it was. Dan. He stood at a distance, his posture less confrontational than before. His face was tense, but there was no trace of the bravado he carried the night before. Instead, he looked uncertain, even hesitant. Raven sighed inwardly, unwrapping her hands as she stepped away from the bag. "What do you want, Dan?" she asked, her tone neutral. Dan shifted uncomfortably, his eyes avoiding hers. I wanted to talk." "I'm listening," she said, crossing her arms. He hesitated before saying, "Look, about yesterday. I was out of line. I don't usually lose my temper like that." Raven raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. "Go on." "I guess." He trailed off, struggling for words. "I guess I felt threatened. You're strong, and you don't need anyone's help. That's not something I'm used to." Raven's gaze softened slightly, though her tone remained firm. "Strength isn't a threat, Dan. It's a tool. How you react to it is up to you." Dan nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping. "I just wanted to apologize for everything." Raven studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Apology accepted. But if you ever cross the line again, I won't hesitate to stand my ground." Dan's face reddened, but he nodded. "Fair enough." As he walked away, Raven returned to the heavy bag, her thoughts racing. The confrontation had shifted something, not just in Dan, but in the gym as a whole. The ripples of her actions were still spreading, and she knew they wouldn't settle anytime soon. But Raven didn't come here to be a symbol. She came here to work. And that's exactly what she intended to do. The weight of shadows. The gym buzzed with a mix of energy and unease. The aftershocks of the viral video were still rippling through the fitness center, transforming what was once a haven of sweat and discipline into a stage of whispered conversations and stolen glances. Raven walked through the entrance as she always did, earbuds in, gym bag slung over her shoulder, her stride purposeful. But this time, she felt the weight of eyes following her more intensely than before. She had always carried herself with quiet confidence, a product of years in the military where discipline and focus were not just values but survival tools. But now she felt like a symbol in a place she had once felt invisible. The gym had become a microcosm of the online world outside, where opinions were formed without full context, and the nuances of strength, both physical and mental, were often misunderstood. As she approached the squat rack, she noticed a group of 3 men lingering nearby. They weren't using the equipment, just standing there, occasionally glancing her way. Their hushed voices carried faintly over the din of clanging weights and pumping music. "That's her," one of them muttered, nodding in her direction. "She doesn't look like much," another said, his tone laced with skepticism. Raven ignored them. She adjusted the weights on the barbell with precision, her movements deliberate and unhurried. If they wanted a show, they'd be disappointed. Her focus was on her training, not their judgments. The group continued to linger, their whispers growing bolder as their curiosity morphed into something less harmless. One of them, a tall man with a wiry frame and a backward baseball cap, stepped forward. "Hey," he called out, his voice cutting through the noise. "You're the one from the video, right? The Navy SEAL or whatever." Raven paused, resting her hands on the barbell. She turned her head slightly, her expression neutral, but her eyes sharp. "I'm the one minding my own business," she said, her tone even. The man smirked, unbothered by her dismissal. "Relax, I just wanted to see if the hype was real. You took that guy down pretty quick in the video. Think you could do the same to me?" His friends chuckled, their laughter a low, mocking rumble that grated against the air. Raven didn't rise to the bait. She had seen men like him before, thrill-seekers who mistook her silence for weakness and her control for fear. She turned back to her barbell, focusing on her grip. "Not interested," she said simply, her voice calm. The man's smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of frustration. "Come on, don't be like that. I'm just trying to have some fun. You're not scared, are you?" Raven didn't look at him. She bent her knees, bracing herself under the barbell, and lifted it with fluid precision. The weight rested on her shoulders, but it was nothing compared to the burden of unwarranted attention she carried daily. She completed her squats with perfect form, ignoring the man's presence entirely. By the time she racked the barbell, the man's patience had worn thin. He stepped closer, his voice losing its playful edge. "I'm talking to you," he said, louder this time. Raven straightened, her movements slow and deliberate. She turned to face him fully, her expression unreadable, but her posture radiating strength. "I heard you," she said, her voice low but steady. "And I said no." The man opened his mouth to retort, but the intensity in her gaze stopped him. For a moment, the bravado drained from his face, replaced by something closer to confusion. His friends, sensing the shift in power, fell silent. "Let me give you some advice," Raven continued, her tone sharp enough to cut through the tension. "Respect isn't optional. You don't earn it by pushing others. You earn it by knowing when to step back." The man blinked, taken aback by the quiet authority in her words. He hesitated, then stepped back, his smirk replaced by a sheepish expression. "Yeah, okay," he muttered, retreating to his friends. Raven turned away, the encounter already fading from her mind. She grabbed her water bottle and towel, heading toward the pull-up bars. The energy in the gym shifted again, the buzz of conversation returning as people resumed their workouts. Later, as Raven worked through a series of pull-ups, she noticed Tara hovering near the front desk, her face pale and her hands clenched around a clipboard. Something was wrong. Raven dropped down from the bar, wiping her hands on her towel, and walked over. "Tara," she said, her voice calm but concerned. "What's going on?" Tara looked up, startled. "Oh, Raven. I didn't want to bother you. But that guy from last night, Dan. He called the gym earlier. Raven's brow furrowed. What did he want? He was complaining, Tara said, her voice barely above a whisper. He said you embarrassed him. And he's threatening to file a complaint against the gym if we don't revoke your membership. Raven's jaw tightened, but her expression remained controlled. And what did management say? Tara hesitated. They're considering it. But I told them what really happened. I said he was the one harassing you. Raven nodded, appreciating Tara's support. Thank you. I'll talk to them myself. After her workout, Raven approached the manager's office, her steps firm and purposeful. Inside, the gym manager, a middle-aged man named Carl, sat behind a cluttered desk, typing furiously on his computer. He looked up as Raven knocked on the doorframe. Raven, he said, leaning back in his chair, I was hoping to talk to you. So I've heard, she replied, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. I understand Dan made a complaint. Carl sighed, rubbing his temples. He did. He claims you were aggressive and that your behavior created a hostile environment. Raven's expression didn't waver. Did he mention why I acted the way I did? Or that he put his hands on me? Carl nodded slowly. Tara told me everything. And honestly, I've seen the video. I know you didn't escalate the situation, but this is a tricky spot for the gym. We don't want bad press. Raven's voice was calm but firm. Bad press isn't caused by standing up to harassment. It's caused by tolerating it. Carl studied her for a moment, then nodded. You're right. I just needed to hear your side. As far as I'm concerned, your membership is safe. Thank you, Raven said. But let me make something clear. If Dan, or anyone else, crosses the line again, I'll handle it the same way. Respect isn't negotiable. Carl leaned forward, his expression softening. You're a remarkable person, Raven. I just hope you know how much of an impact you've had on people here. Tara, the other staff, even some of the members. They look up to you. Raven nodded, her voice quiet but resolute. I didn't come here to be anyone's role model. I came here to work on myself. But if what I do inspires others, then so be it. As she left the office, Raven felt a sense of clarity. The gym wasn't just a place to lift weights or run miles. It was a space where people brought their insecurities, their ambitions, and their fears. And sometimes they needed a reminder of what true strength looked like. Walking out into the crisp evening air, Raven felt the weight of the day lift slightly. She wasn't here to change the world, but she wouldn't shrink from it either. And if people wanted to watch, to whisper, or even to challenge her, they were welcome to try. She knew who she was, and that was enough. The gathering storm. The viral attention surrounding Raven's encounter with Dan had brought more than just whispers to the gym. By now, the video had been dissected online, shared across platforms, and even picked up by a few local news outlets. Headlines like "Ex-Navy SEAL Silences Gym Harasser" and "Strength and Grace. A Woman's Stand Against Intimidation" swirled through social media feeds, fueling debates about public spaces, respect, and resilience. Raven, however, had no interest in the noise. She avoided the comments, ignored interview requests, and stayed focused on her routine. But not everyone shared her detachment. The next evening, the gym was unusually crowded. Raven noticed it the moment she walked in. There were more people than usual, and many of them weren't there to work out. Groups lingered near the machines, stealing glances at her and whispering behind cupped hands. A few even had their phones out, their cameras not so subtly aimed in her direction. She sighed inwardly but kept her stride steady as she headed to the free weights section. The attention wasn't unexpected, but it was unwelcome. She hadn't asked for this spotlight. All she wanted was to train in peace. As she began her warm-up, Tara appeared by her side, her face flushed with nervous energy. "Hey, Raven," Tara said, her voice low. "I thought you should know. There's someone here asking about you." Raven set down the weights and raised an eyebrow. "Asking about me?" Tara nodded, glancing toward the entrance. Yeah, some guy. He didn't give his name, but he said he saw the video and wanted to meet you. Raven's jaw tightened slightly. She didn't need to look to know what type of person this was. Someone drawn to the spectacle, expecting entertainment or validation. Where is he now? She asked. Tara pointed subtly toward the cardio section, where a tall man in his early 30s stood, his arms crossed. He was muscular, with the kind of build that screamed competition. His eyes locked onto Raven the moment Tara gestured in his direction. He's been staring since he walked in, Tara added nervously. Raven sighed. I'll handle it. She approached the man with calm, measured steps, her expression neutral but firm. Can I help you? She asked, her tone steady. The man turned fully to face her, his posture confident but not overtly aggressive. You're Raven, right? The woman from the video. Raven didn't confirm or deny it. I'm busy. What do you want? He smirked, the kind of smirk she'd seen 100 times before. Relax. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just wanted to see if you're as good as they say. Raven crossed her arms. As good at what? Handling yourself, he replied, his tone laced with challenge. I'm Jack, ex-Army. Saw the video and figured I'd stop by. I like to see strength in action. I'm not here to entertain you, Jack, Raven said bluntly. If you're looking for a show, you're in the wrong place. Jack's smirk faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. Come on, don't be like that. It's not every day you see someone handle a guy like that so cleanly. People could learn a thing or two from you. Raven studied him for a moment, trying to gauge his intentions. There was a cockiness in his demeanor, but also a hint of respect. Still, she had no patience for games. If you want to learn something, she said, her voice sharp, start by respecting people's boundaries. Jack held up his hands defensively. Fair enough. But for what it's worth, I think what you did was impressive. Without waiting for a response, he walked away, leaving Raven with a mixture of irritation and curiosity. She wasn't sure if his presence was a one-off or a sign of things to come, but either way, she pushed the encounter from her mind and returned to her workout. The rest of the evening was relatively uneventful, but the tension in the gym lingered. Raven could feel it in the way people moved around her, cautious and overly aware of her presence. Some offered her nods or small smiles of encouragement, while others avoided eye contact altogether. It was as if her quiet strength had become both a source of inspiration and intimidation. As she wrapped up her session, the gym manager, Carl, approached her near the water fountain. His expression was unreadable, but his tone was measured. Raven, can we talk for a minute? He asked. She nodded, following him to a quieter corner near his office. Carl leaned against the wall, crossing his arms as he spoke. I wanted to give you a heads up, he said. We've been getting calls, people asking about you, about the video. Some are supportive, but others, not so much. Raven raised an eyebrow. Not supportive how? Carl hesitated. Some people think your presence here is making the gym unsafe. They say you're too intimidating, that you're setting a tone that makes them uncomfortable. Raven's eyes narrowed slightly, though her expression remained calm. Unsafe because I defended myself. Carl sighed. I know it's ridiculous, but perception matters, and with all the attention this has brought, we're walking a fine line. So, what are you saying? Raven asked, her tone firm. I'm saying we support you, Carl replied. But I need you to be aware that not everyone sees it that way. Some people don't like being reminded of their own weaknesses. Raven nodded slowly. I understand. But I'm not here to coddle anyone. If people are uncomfortable, that's on them, not me. Carl gave a small smile. That's what I figured you'd say. Just be careful. The world's watching now. As Raven left the gym that night, the words, the world's watching, echoed in her mind. It wasn't the first time she'd felt the weight of scrutiny, but this was different. This wasn't about a mission or a team. It was about her alone, standing in the spotlight. The city streets were quiet as she walked to her car, the hum of distant traffic blending with the rustle of leaves in the breeze. She paused for a moment, leaning against her car and looking up at the stars. They were a reminder of the vastness of the world, the insignificance of individual moments in the grand scheme of things. But insignificance didn't mean irrelevance. Raven had learned that long ago. Every action, no matter how small, had the potential to ripple outward, touching lives in ways she couldn't predict. She exhaled deeply, unlocking her car and sliding into the driver's seat. As the engine roared to life, she glanced at her phone, where another flood of notifications awaited her. Messages from strangers, interview requests, debates sparked by her quiet stand for self-respect. Raven didn't need the validation, but she couldn't ignore the impact. The world was watching, and maybe, just maybe, it was ready to learn. Legacy of resilience. The air outside the gym was crisp, carrying the scent of approaching rain. Raven sat in her car, her hands resting on the steering wheel as the world around her buzzed with activity. The gym had become an unexpected theater, and she its reluctant star. She'd never sought fame or recognition. Her journey was one of self-discipline, quiet strength, and a refusal to bend under pressure. But now, her actions had rippled far beyond her control, touching lives she might never meet. Her phone buzzed on the seat beside her. Another flood of notifications, another reminder that the world was still talking. She glanced at the screen. Messages from strangers poured in, some thanking her for her bravery, others offering their own stories of standing up against bullies. But one message stood out, a simple text from an unfamiliar number. "Thank you. You reminded me what strength looks like." Raven stared at the message for a moment, then put her phone down. The weight of her actions wasn't in the viral video or the attention it brought, but in the quiet impact it had on individuals. She started the car, letting the engine's hum ground her. It was time to move forward. The next day, Raven returned to the gym early in the morning. It was quieter then, the crowd thinner, and the atmosphere calmer. She preferred this time of day, when the energy in the room was more about focus than spectacle. But even in the stillness, she noticed the lingering tension. People whispered as she passed, their curiosity unspoken but palpable. As she moved to the pull-up bar, she felt a presence behind her. Turning, she saw Tara, the young employee who had been her quiet ally throughout the ordeal. "Hey," Tara said, her voice hesitant. "I just wanted to check in. Are you okay?" Raven nodded. "I'm fine. Why?" Tara shifted uncomfortably. "It's just everything that's been happening. The video, the people asking about you. It's a lot. I don't know how you're staying so calm." Raven smiled faintly. Calm isn't about not feeling the pressure. It's about not letting it control you. Tara nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "There's something else," she said quietly. "Dan came by again." Raven's expression hardened slightly. "What did he want?" "He didn't say much," Tara replied. "Just asked if you were here. Carl told him he wasn't welcome anymore, but he seemed angry." Raven exhaled slowly, her mind already calculating. Men like Dan rarely accepted defeat easily. His anger wasn't surprising, but it was dangerous. "Did he threaten anyone?" "No," Tara said quickly. "But the way he looked, it gave me a bad feeling." Raven placed a reassuring hand on Tara's shoulder. "If he comes back, call the police. And don't engage him. He's not worth it." Tara nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "Thanks, Raven. I just feel better knowing you're here." Later that evening, Raven was midway through her workout when the gym door swung open with a loud creak. The energy in the room shifted instantly. She turned to see Dan standing in the entrance, his eyes scanning the room until they locked onto her. His expression was a volatile mix of anger and desperation. Raven straightened, her body instinctively shifting into a stance of readiness. She noticed Carl stepping out from behind the front desk, his face pale but determined. "Dan," Carl said, his voice firm. You're not welcome here. Leave now." Dan ignored him, his focus fixed on Raven. He took a step forward, his voice loud enough to carry. "You think you're better than me. You think you can just humiliate me and get away with it." The room fell silent, all eyes on the unfolding confrontation. Raven remained calm, her voice steady as she replied, "This isn't the place for this, Dan. Walk away." But Dan didn't walk away. Instead, he advanced further into the room, his movements erratic. "You don't get to tell me what to do," he spat. "You think you're so tough, don't you? Let's see how tough you really are." Carl stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "I said leave, or I'll call the police." Dan hesitated, his fists clenching at his sides. He looked around the room, realizing the weight of the stares directed at him. But instead of backing down, he shoved Carl aside and lunged toward Raven. What happened next was so fast that most people didn't fully process it until it was over. Raven sidestepped his charge with practiced ease, her movements fluid and controlled. She grabbed his wrist, twisting it just enough to force him off balance, then swept his legs out from under him. Dan hit the floor with a thud, gasping as the air was knocked from his lungs. Raven stepped back, her stance relaxed but ready. "This ends now, Dan," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "You've lost. Leave before you embarrass yourself further." Dan groaned, clutching his side as he scrambled to his feet. His bravado was gone, replaced by the stark realization of his defeat. He glanced around the room, his eyes meeting the judgmental stares of the onlookers. Without another word, he stumbled toward the door and disappeared into the night. The gym erupted into a mix of whispers and scattered applause. Raven turned to Carl, who was still catching his breath. "Are you okay?" she asked. Carl nodded. "I'm fine. But that guy, he's got problems." "He does," Raven agreed. "But they're not my problem anymore." Tara approached cautiously, her face a mix of awe and concern. "That was incredible," she said. "But aren't you worried he might come back?" "If he does, I'll handle it," Raven said simply. "But I don't think he will. He's already lost twice. He won't risk a third." Over the next few days, the tension in the gym began to dissipate. The viral video lost its momentum, replaced by the internet's ever-changing focus. But the impact of Raven's actions lingered, not in the form of whispers or stares, but in the quiet confidence of those around her. Tara started taking self-defense classes, inspired by Raven's strength. Carl implemented new policies to ensure the gym remained a safe space for everyone. And other members began to carry themselves with a bit more confidence, emboldened by the example Raven had set. As for Raven, she returned to her routine, her focus unwavering. The world might have been watching, but she hadn't changed. She was still the same woman who walked into the gym every day, earbuds in, ready to work. Strength wasn't about overpowering others. It was about standing firm in the face of adversity, knowing who you were, and refusing to be shaken. Raven didn't seek recognition or validation. She didn't need it. Her legacy wasn't in the video or the headlines. It was in the quiet ripples she left behind, the way her actions inspired others to find their own strength. And that, to her, was enough.